The ham had been on the table for exactly 4 minutes when my mother made her announcement. I remember the detail because I'd been watching the steam rise off it, thinking about how I used to love Easter as a child. The egg hunts in the backyard of this very house, my sneakers wet from the morning grass. Grandma Ruth pressing a $5 bill into my palm and whispering that I was her favorite, but I shouldn't tell anyone. The way this dining room used to smell like safety, like honey glaze and good coffee and a world that hadn't yet decided what to ask of me. It hadn't felt like safety in a long time. There were 32 people packed into my parents' dining room that afternoon. Aunts, uncles, cousins I saw twice a year, my parents' neighbors from down the street who had somehow become permanent fixtures at every family gathering over the past decade. My sister Vivian sat directly across from me in a new dress, her hair professionally blown out, her boyfriend Marcus beside her looking uncomfortable in a collar that was half a size too tight. She'd been unusually quiet since I arrived, which I'd noted and then dismissed as tiredness. That was my first mistake. Vivian is never quiet without a reason. My name is Nora. I'm 33 years old. I'm a senior compliance officer for a mid-sized financial services firm in Chicago's West Loop, and I have worked, genuinely and without assistance, for every single thing I own. My apartment, my car, my savings, the week-long trip to Portugal I took 2 years ago that my mother described to relatives as one of Nora's little adventures. I say this not to inventory my life for applause but because context matters here. Because what happened at that Easter table only makes complete sense if you understand how thoroughly, and for how long, my family had constructed a different story about me. My mother stood, wine glass in hand, and smiled at the room the way she smiles when she's already decided something and is simply performing the announcement portion. It's a smile I've known my entire life. Warm on the surface, load-bearing underneath. "Before we eat," she said, "your father and I want to share some wonderful news about Vivian." I set down my fork. As most of you know, Grandma Ruth's estate has been in the final stages of distribution. The trust she established years ago included a portion specifically designated for Nora. He paused for exactly the right amount of time. After a great deal of family discussion, thoughtful, careful discussion, we've decided together that Nora's portion will be redirected to Vivian, who is at a genuinely pivotal point in her life right now and needs the support in a way that Nora simply doesn't. Nora has her career, her stability. She already has enough. And she understands. 32 heads turned toward me in unison. I want to describe what that moment felt like from the inside, but I'm not sure language is fully equipped for it. It wasn't anger, not immediately. It was something more structural than anger, like a door swinging open onto a room you had suspected existed for years but had never been permitted to see clearly. Every time my accomplishments were mentioned briefly before the conversation pivoted back to Vivian's latest crisis. Every holiday where I quietly covered costs that were never acknowledged. Every "Nora is fine, Nora can handle it, Nora has enough." All of it suddenly had architecture. All of it had been leading here, to this table, to this announcement delivered in front of 32 witnesses so that the social pressure of the room could do the work that guilt and obligation hadn't quite finished. They had built a trap. They had dressed it in a holiday and put ham on the table next to it. "I don't understand," I said, keeping my voice completely level. "Because a conversation like that never happened. Not with me." My mother's smile tightened by a degree. "Nora, this really isn't the time. You just made it the time. In front of 32 people." Vivian looked at her plate. Marcus reached for his water glass and didn't let go of it. "You have a good job," my father said from the head of the table, in the particular tone he uses when he has decided a matter is resolved and is simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. "You have your apartment, your salary, your whole setup down there in the city. Your sister is trying to build something real. It's not a large ask, Nora. It's family. It's my trust fund, Dad. Grandma left it to me. She put my name on the document. Grandma would have wanted the family taken care of. All of us. Grandma wanted me taken care of. That's the reason she established a designated portion. She wasn't confused. She wasn't making a mistake she'd want corrected later. You're being dramatic. I'm being accurate. There's a difference." My mother's palm came down on the table hard enough to rattle the wine glasses and send a small ripple across the surface of the gravy boat. The room flinched collectively. Even Vivian looked up. "That is enough." My mother's voice had dropped into its lowest register, the one that meant we were past performance and into something rawer. We are not doing this today. You are being selfish, you are embarrassing this family in front of people who love us, and frankly, after everything your father and I have sacrificed for you over the years. What have you sacrificed for me, Mom? The question landed and sat there. She opened her mouth. Something moved across her face. Not guilt exactly, more like a calculation running behind her eyes. She closed her mouth again. I'm asking genuinely, I said. I'd like you to list it. Because I have been keeping my own list for about 3 years now, and my list looks very different from whatever accounting you're running in your head. Mine has dollar amounts on it. It has dates. My Aunt Patricia, seated 2 chairs from my mother, placed a careful hand on her arm. A cousin across the room leaned to his wife and said something behind his hand. The room had taken on the specific discomfort of people witnessing something they had been invited to observe but hadn't fully agreed to. They'd come for Easter dinner. They were getting something considerably more honest. My father said my name in a warning tone. And I turned toward the corner of the room. She had been there since before most guests arrived. I had let her in myself 43 minutes before dinner was called, and introduced her to the 2 relatives who asked only as a colleague who needed somewhere quiet to make some calls. She had a glass of water she hadn't touched, a plate of appetizers she had politely accepted and left mostly uneaten, and a black leather briefcase that had sat closed on the floor beside her chair for the entire meal. She had watched everything with the patient, unreadable expression of someone who has spent a career in rooms where people are arguing about money. Her name was Diane Okafor. She was 51 years old, a managing trustee and estate attorney with 23 years of experience, and she had overseen Grandma Ruth's trust since its establishment in 2019. I had called her 8 days earlier on a Tuesday evening, after Vivian had let something slip at a birthday dinner for our cousin. A casual, slightly wine-loose comment about things getting sorted out at Easter, that had told me with reasonable certainty where this holiday was heading. I had spent the following 2 days deciding whether I was overreacting. I had spent day 3 accepting that I wasn't. I had called Diane on day 4. I nodded once in her direction. Diane set down her water glass with no particular urgency. She reached down, picked up her briefcase, set it on her lap and stood. She smoothed her jacket. She was not a physically imposing woman, medium height, reading glasses pushed up on her head, sensible heels, but she carried herself with the particular stillness of someone who has never once needed volume to command a room. Good afternoon, everyone. Her voice was pleasant and unhurried. I apologize for the interruption to your meal. My name is Diane Okafor. I'm the managing trustee of the Ruth Eleanor Hartwell estate. Given the nature of what's just been announced, I think some clarification would be useful before this conversation continues any further, and I'll try to be brief. My mother's expression cycled through confusion, recognition, and something harder in the space of about 4 seconds. Nora. Who is this woman? She's the trustee, Mom. The one whose signature any fund transfer would actually require. Diane opened her briefcase, removed a tabbed folder, and laid it open on the corner of the table closest to my father without making eye contact with him. The gesture was practiced and entirely deliberate. She wanted him to see the documents. She wanted him to understand before she said a word what category of conversation this had become. The Hartwell Trust was established in July of 2019 and amended to its final form in March of 2022, approximately 3 months before Mrs. Hartwell's passing. She was of sound mind at both signings, and we have full documentation supporting that fact. Diane turned a page. The designated beneficiary for the primary distribution, $94,000, currently held in a managed account at current value, is Nora Christine Hartwell Breaks. The designation is explicit, specific, and legally documented. It is not subject to informal family reallocation. She looked at my father directly for the first time. Any amendment to the designated beneficiary would require a formal written request from the current beneficiary, a 30-day review period by my office, independent legal counsel for the beneficiary to confirm no undue influence, and a court filing if any party chose to contest the process. That process at minimum takes 4 months. My father's mouth was open. Nothing was coming out of it. I also want to address something my office became aware of during a routine correspondence review last week. Diane's tone didn't change. It remained pleasant, professional, almost conversational, which somehow made it worse. My office received 5 written communications over the past 4 months requesting information about the feasibility of redirecting the beneficiary designation without the named beneficiary's direct involvement. Those communications were submitted as a joint request. She still didn't look at my parents by name. He didn't need to. Every person in the room knew exactly who she meant. My office responded to each communication clearly and in writing, explaining that no such change could be initiated without Nora's full participation and documented consent. It appears those responses were not shared with Nora. The refrigerator in the kitchen was audible. A child at the far end of the table, my cousin's youngest, maybe 7 years old, asked his mother quietly if dessert was soon. His mother shushed him with a hand on his shoulder and did not take her eyes off Diane. My mother sat down. She didn't announce that she was sitting. She didn't say anything at all. She simply lowered herself back into her chair and became smaller, in the way that people become smaller when the story they've been telling publicly runs out of room to stand in. My father closed his mouth, opened it again. We were simply exploring. I understand, Diane said in a tone that indicated she understood completely and found it thoroughly documented. Are there any questions about the trust's current legal standing or the distribution timeline? Nobody spoke. 32 people found places to look that were not my parents' faces. Wonderful. Diane closed the folder, returned it to her briefcase, and clasped it shut with 2 clean clicks that were somehow the most satisfying sounds I had ever heard in that dining room. She picked up her water glass, took a sip and sat back down. I stayed for 25 more minutes. Leaving immediately would have felt like its own kind of performance, and I was finished performing for this family. I ate some of the ham. I answered my Aunt Patricia's careful, gentle questions about my neighborhood in the West Loop. I listened to my father make 2 attempts at normal conversation with relatives who responded politely and briefly and then found reasons to refill their drinks. Vivian did not speak for the remainder of the meal. When I stood to leave, she followed me to the front porch without being asked. The afternoon had gone gray, the kind of flat Midwestern Easter sky that can't decide whether it wants to be spring yet. She looked tired in a way the new dress couldn't cover. I noticed it now in the outdoor light away from the staging of the dining room. There were shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there at Christmas, and something tightly wound in the way she was holding her own arms. I didn't know she was going to do it like that, Vivian said. In front of everyone. But you knew she was going to do it. She looked at the porch railing. The silence was its own confirmation. I don't know what's happening in your life right now, I said, pulling on my coat. I don't know what you told them you needed or what they promised you, or what conversation happened in this house that I wasn't part of. But I need you to understand something clearly. I waited until she looked at me. Grandma left that money to me because she paid attention. She watched this family for 81 years and she understood exactly how it worked, and she decided that I needed something that was legally, documentably, unambiguously mine. That wasn't an accident. That wasn't her being careless or forgetful or unfair to you. That was her being precise. Vivian's eyes were bright in a way that might have been tears held carefully in place. I'm not your enemy, I said. I've never been your enemy. But I am also not a resource that this family gets to allocate. I am a person she loved specifically. And she made sure I'd have something that proved it. I drove home on the expressway with the windows cracked despite the cold because I needed the air moving. I called Diane from the highway to thank her, and she told me the distribution timeline was 8 to 10 weeks, clean, no anticipated complications. I thanked her again and meant it in a way that felt bigger than the words. I thought about Grandma Ruth for most of the drive. The $5 bills. The whispered favorites. The way she had pulled me aside at my college graduation, away from the photographs and the noise, and held both my hands and said quietly, looking directly at me, I see you working, sweetheart. I see all of it. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. He had seen it. She had written it down, signed it in front of witnesses and filed it with an attorney. The trust would clear in 8 to 10 weeks. I already had a list. A solo trip I had been rescheduling for 4 years. A conversation with a real estate attorney about a 1-bedroom in the neighborhood I had been watching since last spring. A savings threshold I'd been protecting so carefully it had started to feel like holding my breath. I could breathe out now. Grandma Ruth had handed me a door and she had made sure no one else could hold it shut. I was 33 years old and I was finally, completely ready to walk through it,